everybody, and welcome to another amazing episode of the John Riley Project. We're taking the show on the road, bringing the podcast studio here to Ramona, California. I'm so pleased to have as my guest Mark DiCiero from Classic Rotors Museum. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine. Glad to have you out here.
You know, we have a mutual friend, Mr. Pete Neild, right?
Yes,
he's off camera right now. You can't see him. But anyways, Pete brought me here a couple weeks ago and you showed me your museum and I was just blown away by the amount of aircraft, helicopters. I mean, it was amazing. And we said, we got to do a podcast. We have to share this story because it's such an amazing story. So God, tell me a little bit about the museum, how you got started in this.
So years ago, it started off with thinking that helicopters were the way for me to travel to and from my home to work.
Wow.
And at the time I was 22 years old, and I said, that's what I'll do is I can buy property out in Alpine, which is kind of in the back country, but it was affordable. And then I said, and then what I'll do to get to work is I'll just get a helicopter and fly to work. So yeah, that was the idea. In reality, it doesn't really happen that way. But so I said, well, how am I going to get a helicopter? So I said, well, I guess I'm going to have to build one. So that's what I started off with.
Wow.
And there was a company out there called Rotorway, and they made this homemade kit, and you would just put it together in your backyard and teach yourself how to fly.
Oh my God. Really? I mean, that must have been like really difficult to do, right?
Well, back during the time I thought, hey, this is easy. And then I found out after 2.5 years building the helicopter.
2.5 years?
2.5 years to build it. Because it comes in a box with a bunch of tubes. So the first thing you have to do is you got to start cutting the tubes and welding everything together.
Did it give you like an instruction manual to assemble it?
Actually, very good instruction manual, but it was a little more than what I was expecting to do. But I was a machinist, so the parts that you had to make and machine, that wasn't a big deal. Mm-hmm. But it still took 2.5 years.
Wow.
And so after building this thing, then it came time, okay, now you're going to teach yourself how to fly. Because that's the way they portrayed the kit, that you just put it together and you start teaching yourself how to fly. So I did it. I'm following the directions, so to speak. And it was kind of funny because the way they portray their kit is they say the only way you're going to be successful is follow the directions. And they would show they had videos that would show a person what's wrong with this video. And in one video, the guy's building, not looking at the other directions, and the other guy is building and he's looking at the directions. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm definitely a direction type of guy.
Okay.
I like to read them, understand exactly what it is I'm going to do. Then it got to the point where, okay, now you have to learn how to fly it. So I just kept reading it. Well, when I showed up on their front door and I said, oh, by the way, I can hover. They said, what do you mean you can hover? I said, yeah, I got down to where I hovered, and that's why I figured I'd come in and now get my instruction from the factory.
Right.
And I remember going out there, and the guy goes, so you can hover, huh? So we get in one of the factory helicopters, mm-hmm. and this guy just sits there and he goes, go ahead, hover me.
Right.
And I said, oh, okay. Now for me, I've been practicing with my helicopter by myself. And as I'm pulling up on what we call the collective, which lifts the helicopter up into the air, I'm realizing, this was a lot higher because there's two of us in it.
Yeah.
It was only just me before. So I'm pulling and pulling and pulling, and I'm doing it very slowly. This guy sitting next to me, he realizes, God, this guy's going to hover this helicopter.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you see him start to cover the controls, get closer. Mm-hmm. He went from this position to, okay, it looks like this guy really thinks he can lift this off. And I picked up a hover, and he's like, well, that's pretty good. Go move forward about 10 feet. I moved forward 10 feet. I moved he says, move to the left, move to the right. Let's do a full 360. And right around that time, the wind kind of kicked up a little. And there's a difference between commanded control mm-hmm. versus the wind blowing you. So that was an uncommanded action. The helicopter started moving to the left. And when I was alone at myself on my homemade grass pad,
right.
And generally speaking, I'm only about 6 inches off the ground, he immediately said, well, get up higher. So I was about 1.5 foot now, which is, to me, high off the ground.
Yeah.
Because when I was practicing by myself, the minute I got into any type of problem, I would just slam that collective down and you'd hit the ground, and that would be it.
Because you're only 6 inches up.
That's right, and it's grass.
Okay.
You're on sod, right?
So you're in the backyard of your house?
I grew a 100-foot diameter pad of grass. So when this uncommanded event took place, I just immediately dropped collected. And we slammed to the ground, and he's like, "What the hell are you doing?" He yelled at me. And I go, "Well, that's what I did. I mean, when it kind of got away from me a little bit, I just put it on the ground."
Yeah.
"Well, don't do that," he says. He says, "I'm here with you. Don't ever do that again, all right?"
Yeah.
I said, "Okay, fine." So we continued with the instruction for about an hour. And sure enough, at the end of it, he goes, "Well, you got hovering down. And trust me, you don't need to slam it to the ground just because it gets away from you because there was a wind issue there." He goes, "Just let it drift a little and then command it back." And so after that hour, he was happy with my ability to hover. I continued with him for another 4 days because they go through a whole process of kind of training you.
So where was this factory?
Oh, this was in Tempe, Arizona.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so, and by the way, this was 40 years ago.
Right.
Well, yeah, about 40 years ago. So after that, he trained me on things that I wasn't used to doing, like climbing out and doing pattern work, doing an auto rotation. And actually, we started off with what they call quick stops. And then I came back here to San Diego, moved the helicopter from my backyard to this airport here at Ramona Airport, and I started to practice these other items. And so then after about 20 hours of practicing these other items, I went back, and then he taught me how to do what we call auto rotations all the way to the ground. Most people think that a helicopter will drop like a rock if the engine quits, and that's not true at all. What happens is it's the rotor blades that keep you in the air, not the engine. Okay, the engine, yes, is supplying power to the rotor blades, but it's the rotor blades that are keeping you in the air. So when the engine quits, you could manipulate the controls in such a manner that you can keep those rotor blades turning as you're more or less auto rotating to the ground, meaning there's no power to the blades. And then when you get closer to the ground, you can flare it and just land. So
this is amazing because I would imagine that 99.9% of helicopter pilots got their training in the military, right?
Oh, that's probably true, yes.
Yeah, and so you are definitely an exception to the rule, a civilian learning on his own in his backyard.
Well, as a matter of fact, like I said, when I walked in there and said, "Yeah, I can hover," they looked at me like, "What do you mean you can hover?" I was only the 5th person to get their license out of 2,500 kids sold. Not only that, I was the youngest because at this time I was 24 and a half when I went in there.
Right.
And they looked at me and they go, "Yeah, when you came in here and said you could hover, we said, that's a bunch of bull. There's no way you could hover." So they were really surprised that I followed the instructions and I taught myself how to hover at home. And so at the time, I used to watch the videos on all the pioneers, Sikorsky and Piasecki and Hiller, and there was 5 of them out there, and that's how they learned how to fly because there was no instructors, there's nobody to teach you how to fly.
Right.
So all these pioneers, you see the pictures. It's tied down. I tied mine down, and kind of lifted it up and got jumping around in between the tether.
Yeah.
And as time goes on, you remove the tethers and you got a little smoother. It took me 20 hours before I felt comfortable. As a matter of fact, the day I felt comfortable, I was just trying to move the helicopter along the ground, dragging it on the skids, and but keeping it was touching the ground the whole time. And as each week went by, I was probably pulling a little more power, and it was getting easier to kind of drag it along the ground because it was getting lighter. And I had a bunch of friends watching me one day, and all of a sudden they were all waving their arms frantically, and I'm thinking, oh no, something's coming off the helicopter. So I shut it down, and they come running over to me, and they say, you were this high off the ground the whole time. And I go, you're kidding me. So see, I didn't even know I was in the air. They go, yes, you were this high off the ground the whole time. So that's when I found out I was actually hovering. And then I continued for about another 10 hours of doing that, and just playing around with it. And then that's when I decided, well, it's probably time I go to the factory and get the factory training.
That is awesome. So this is like you're in your early 20s. You had this fascination with helicopters.
Yes.
You said, I'm going to get my own helicopter. You built it. You taught yourself in the backyard to hover. You went to the factory, got the formal training. And then what did you do after you were a fully trained pilot?
Well, so on this particular helicopter, I continued to fly it. I ended up about 90 hours in it before I went to get my actual FAA test to become a pilot. And that was a little unusual event too, because the FAA came out and they looked at the helicopter, and their attitude was, well, I'm not getting in that, even though there was 2 seats in it.
Yeah.
So he wrote down a set of commands that he wanted me to do. And these were commands like pick up, go forward 10 feet, go to the left 10 feet, go to the right 10 feet, turn around 180, set down, lift up again. So it was just a set of commands. There was like 25 commands on this sheet. And he says, I want you to go follow these as I have written them. And if you deviate from any of them, we're going to assume it was uncommanded, therefore you lost control. And I said, okay, fine. Well, by then, I was so bored with these simple 25 commands. I mean, in my backyard, by the way, my backyard was 17 acres. So I was out in the boonies.
All right.
But in my backyard, I had grown this 100 by 100 foot grass pad, just riddled with gophers. So every day I'd go out there, there'd be mounds everywhere. And I'd get in the helicopter, fire it up, and just as practice, I'd go out there and I'd use the skid of the helicopter, and I would slide over each one of the mounds with the skid and tamp them down.
Nice.
And then I'd fly to the next one. Sometimes I do it with the left skid, sometimes I do it with the right skid, you know?
So you're like a groundskeeper at the same time.
And I'm just doing it while I'm flying the helicopter. So I was very comfortable with the helicopter and flying at that time, especially hovering. So when he's giving me these basic commands to do, I remember I was out there and I was doing these commands, and we were at an airport in Tempe, Arizona. And all of a sudden, you know, you're listening to the tower, there's traffic going by this area that I was hovering, so you get distracted. And at one point, I think the tower told me, I need you to move over. We've got a taxiing aircraft. So I kind of got out of the way. And then I froze because I'm looking at my instructions. And I'm going, am I on number 13 or am I on number 14? I didn't know where I was at. And so I'm sitting there and I'm going, and I didn't dare move from what I was doing, because then he considers it uncommanded. So I called the tower, ground frequency. I said, by the way, there's an FAA examiner on frequency. I'd like to know what number am I on? And you're on number 14, right? So then I continued the process.
That's smart of you to do that.
And he was a little upset the fact that, you know, what are you doing up there? How could you forget where you're at? I go, well, the tower told me to move over. You heard that. And, and I just forgot where I was. You know? So either way, I passed. And then I flew the aircraft for about another 60 hours. And I actually put it on a trailer and took it to Oshkosh, because all the people that do home-built aircraft go to Oshkosh.
That's like Wisconsin, right?
Yes. And it's the big EAA Oshkosh fly-in. I mean, millions of people go to that show. And thousands and thousands of takeoffs of all these people with their home-built aircraft. Matter of fact, during that week, it's the busiest airport in the world.
Wow.
There's that many home builders, and there's that many people that travel to Oshkosh. So that was kind of like the ultimate for a home builder. Fly your aircraft at Oshkosh. And I went there and I flew it in the show.
Nice.
So that's it. And then I just moved on from there.
So how did you get to the point where you suddenly now have a museum? I mean, I understand you're an enthusiast, you're flying, and then this just kept building over the years, right?
Yeah, well, along those lines, I ended up buying a Robinson helicopter, an R-22, with 2 other friends of mine. And I continued to fly that aircraft to kind of quench that thirst for flight. But then after a while, it's just basic helicopter flying. I wanted more of a challenge.
Right.
And that's when I bought the H-21. Now, that's a tandem rotor helicopter. They call it the Flying Banana.
Okay.
It's not just your average everyday helicopter. Matter of fact, ours was the only one that flew in the world. We spent 18 months working on it to get it into flight-worthy condition. And we started flying this helicopter along with several friends of mine who helped us work and get this thing airworthy again. And we started going to air shows.
Right.
And we realized that, somehow we have to become a nonprofit. So we decided we're going to become a museum, and our one and only aircraft in the museum is this H-21.
Okay.
It in itself was a museum piece.
Right.
Only one flying in the world. So that's how we started off. And before you know it, we bought another helicopter, and now there's 35 helicopters in the museum.
Wow.
So it just kind of started off as a hobby. And now, like I tell people, it's turned into an obligation. I feel the obligation of the keeper of the history.
Right.
And I have to preserve this, and I have to go find them and bring them in and restore them and keep them in the museum. So,
right. I mean, you're capturing the history of aviation here.
Right.
And you've shown us all the multiple generations of tandem aircraft that you have here, and we saw some of those early experimental. You call them birds. I like that.
Yes. We tend. I refer to helicopters as birds.
Yeah, so I'm learning
a lot
the lingo.
of people do.
Yeah. So what's your favorite museum piece that you have here?
Well, people ask me that all the time, and it's like asking you with all amongst your children, who's your favorite kid?
Right.
And no parent could ever say what it is. So I guess it just all depends. I mean, everything that's been brought in the museum has been vetted for a specific reason. And our namesake, Classic Rotors, is to have one of every different type of rotor system.
Okay.
Or represent one of each of the different pioneers of helicopters. So that's what we do. And so each one is sought after. So at that moment in time, it's my favorite.
Okay.
We're going to go find it. We're going to get it. We're going to bring it in the museum. Then what's the next newborn?
Right, right.
And what do we go for next? And it's really all about collecting the history. The best we can do it. And
so have you ever had like a person that came in, saw the tour, and there was one aircraft they were just blown away, or maybe there was one aircraft that they made a special long distance trip to come and see? Yeah,
this happens quite often. The 21, the H-21, which was flown in Vietnam. So during the Vietnam War, helicopters were the new thing. And Vietnam was always referred to as the helicopter war. But the H-21s were there before the Hueys. Everybody knows what the Hueys are. But what came first was the H-21s. Their heyday was 61 through 63. And that was when we were there as the U.S. as a role to help support the South Vietnamese. And so a lot of people that were in that war know the H-21. It was kind of like a hate-love situation, because the H-21 would sit there and take you into a war zone. So you weren't very happy about it. It would drop you off. But boy, you couldn't wait to hear the sound of that helicopter coming back. And you're hearing that th-th-th in the air, knowing that, this thing's taking me out of this place.
Right.
And so there was the hate-love relationship between any helicopter during the Vietnam War. So a lot of people were familiar with the H-21, a lot of people, and we're the only ones with a flying one left in the world.
Wow.
So a lot of people come here to see the H-21. It truly is the flagship of our museum.
Right on. So, you get like 35 different types of aircraft.
Yes.
And that one, the only one in the world that's still operational.
Correct.
That's special.
As a matter of fact, several of the aircraft there are either one of a kind, because they only built one.
Okay.
hence our name, Classic Rotors. And then we have the little subtitle that says the Rare and Vintage Rotorcraft Museum.
Right.
And notice we use the word rotorcraft, not helicopter, because there's a lot of rotorcraft that aren't necessarily helicopters. I mean, all helicopters are rotorcraft, but not all rotorcraft are helicopters.
So what's an example of one that's not a helicopter?
Well, the first closest would be the gyrocopter, where it's pushed through the air by a propeller or pulled through the air by a propeller. But then it has rotor blades that just freewheel and spin just from the fact that you're going through the air.
I see.
Then we have a helicopter, a rotorcraft that looks like a blimp. And when you see how it operates, you'll realize, yep, that's a rotorcraft.
Right.
So you just picture a blimp rotating. You have to see it.
Okay.
And maybe in this podcast, you'll be able to see some video of it.
Okay.
And then there's several rotorcraft. Like we have this one rotorcraft that I think we took some pictures of. It was called the Heli Pod. And the Heli Pod doesn't have a tail rotor on it. It has coaxial rotors, and it has what we call a ducted fan, and it's thrust vectored. So people wouldn't really look at it as a helicopter because it's a ducted, vectored, thrusted fan.
Right.
So again, very helicopterish, but really in the rotorcraft family.
Yeah, I mean, as a layman, I know helicopters. I've seen the tandems, in the movies, and definitely Vietnam. But I was just blown away by all of these. It was almost like futuristic aircraft that were created in the 50s and 60s. Things almost look like you see on the Jetsons, or like something that was during that space race era, that style, that look.
Yes.
So there's some special aircraft here that I enjoy.
We have one of the aircraft that I don't think we talked about, but this was a helicopter for downed Vietnam pilots. So you have an F-86 pilot, and he goes down behind enemy lines. And it was very difficult to go rescue him because you risk the lives of an entire helicopter crew.
Yes.
Maybe 5 to 10 guys flying out there, hovering above a tree line, because that's normally what you had out there in the jungle, lowering down a penetrator to lift them out through a cable and bring them out. You're just a sitting duck during that process.
Right.
So the Pentagon came up with the idea, well, we're just going to send this helicopter in a little pod, and we'll throw it out of an airplane. It'll parachute down. He'll put it together, hop in it, and fly himself out.
Oh, wow.
Thus, more or less executing his own SAR mission, right? He's going to rescue himself. This was great. We'll just throw these things out. He'll hop in it and fly home. Well, then they started getting the reports back to the Pentagon. Hey, by the way, the Rescue Yourself program? Yeah, well, these pilots can't fly helicopters. We've got a problem. What do you mean? They're jet pilots. Yeah, but they can't fly helicopters. They're going to kill themselves trying to save themselves. So that program ended.
Well, it'll probably take them 2.5 years to assemble their helicopter, right? Like you.
That's true. But luckily, in this case, you can put it together in about 20 minutes.
Wow. So do you have some of those here as well?
We do have one example of that here.
That is awesome. It's funny, you brought up the story about, the sound of the H-21, right? And it makes me think of the opening scene to the television show MASH. When the helicopters would come in. Well, what type of aircraft was that?
So that was a Bell 47. And a matter of fact, whenever I talk to people about helicopters and they say, what was that helicopter? I go, you mean the one in MASH? And they go, yeah, that one.
Yeah.
And then I tell them that was a Bell 47. You get the same thing with a Hughes 500. People go, what's a Hughes 500? I say, well, that's the Magnum helicopter. So anyone that remembers the show Magnum PI, and of course it's running again now.
Yeah.
And that's what it's an eggshell looking Hughes 500.
So the new Magnum has a helicopter too?
Same exact one.
Oh, right on.
Even painted the same, I think.
Really?
Yes, they brought it back to life.
When was that Tom Selleck show on? That was like in the mid-'80s,
That was
wasn't it?
80s, I guess, somewhere around there. But I refer to that as a Magnum helicopter. The Bell 47 is the MASH helicopter. And then anytime I want to talk about an S-61 or an H-3, like, what is that? that's the presidential helicopter.
Ah.
So I can relate these helicopters to what most people, recognize them as to be.
Right. Yeah, like the one, the president there on the East Lawn or something that, where they get on the...
Yeah, that's actually an H3 or an S61.
Right on.
So.
Okay. Wow. So now you're a museum, so you must have a lot of people coming through here visiting. What kind of people are typically coming into your museum?
Well, normally, since we're up here in Ramona, it's not like you just drive off the street and say, hey, look, there's a helicopter museum. Mm-hmm. No, what happens is most the people that come to our location, it's the destination. We get a lot from England, a lot from European travelers. They see it as a destination because there's only like 4 helicopter museums in the entire world. And there's 2 here in the U.S., one on the West Coast, us, one on the East Coast called the American Helicopter Museum. Mm-hmm. And then over in Germany, you have the Das Habenschreiber, which, by the way, stands for the Helicopter Museum. And then in England, you have the Helicopter Museum. Now, the English one, the Helicopter Museum, they were up and running long before Das Habenschreiber.
Yeah, okay.
And when I looked at it, I go, what does that mean? And they says, oh, that means the Helicopter Museum. So I don't know if the Germans were getting back at the English there on that one or not. But so that's it. There's only 4 helicopter or rotorcraft dedicated only museums in the world.
Well, I'd imagine a lot of the enthusiasts from Oshkosh have probably made their way here.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
We get visitors. So normally you're aviation oriented and you're aware of a helicopter museum, and it's over here in San Diego County.
But this is just, to me, is like a treasure because there's a guest I interviewed. Her name is Jessica Johnson, and she has a whole website about hidden San Diego, about all these really special places around San Diego County. This should be in her book, really. I mean, this when I got here, I was like, oh my God, a helicopter museum, and I got into your hangar, and I was just blown away by the amount of aircraft that are here. I mean, if you're an aviation enthusiast, if you're just a regular person, just wants to learn about history, I mean, you could walk down memory lane here, going back 30, 40, 50 years.
Yes, most definitely. Our collection is unique, just like all the collections in the other museum. And I can name things that these other museums have that we don't have, but then we have several items that they would like to have. Matter of fact, I endearingly refer to them as my nemesis because we're all going after the same assets, the same piece of history. So when something like that comes available, boy, we try to act quickly to go get it before our competitors are aware of it.
Because the American government makes it available, some of these military aircraft, right?
Yes, some of the military aircraft we can get through what they call the DRMO program, and we can get those aircraft to us. But the other ones are normally someone calling us up and saying, hey, we've got this helicopter. It's sitting in our barn for the last 50 years. Would you want it? And I'd say, well, what is it? Can you send me a picture?
Right.
And a lot of times that picture puts me in a mode that we got to leave today.
Oh, wow.
We have to go get this because I recognize it as a one-of-a-kind piece of history. Other times it's like, we wouldn't be interested in that.
So a little bit of treasure hunting to this.
Oh, they're definitely.
So when the federal government makes some of their assets available, I mean, you would get first dibs before the guys in Germany, right?
Oh, absolutely. Matter of fact, just about anything that's going to be on U.S. government assets, we get first dibs. But there's several aviation-oriented museums that are happy to take anything and all that's aviation.
Right.
So they could have all airplanes, and they'll go after some helicopters that we want.
Right.
Generally speaking, if there's only one available, they're probably going to allocate it to us because that's what we are as a helicopter museum. But if there's several of them, they'll send, they'll give us our choice, and they'll send some of the other ones to what I'd call non-helicopter type museums.
Right. This is unbelievable. I was talking to Pete when we were coming here before, and I said, my podcast's all about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so when we came here with Pete, to me, this seems like this is a reflection of your life and your pursuit of your own happiness. And isn't it? I mean,
it definitely is.
Yeah.
Like I said, there was a defined change in how I looked at it in the beginning and what it is now. You become instilled with this. Like I said, it becomes an obligation almost.
Well, it's a heavy lift, you know?
Right, because, it was fun collecting in the beginning, but now you have to maintain the collection.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot of costs involved with the building and such in order to do that. And just the land lease here at the airport. So now you start getting this financial burden on you.
Yeah.
And yet you can't stop.
No, you can't.
Okay.
People are depending on you.
Well, yeah, and your life's work, because this is what this has been to me now, is my life's work, that I just can't let it fail. So it's a constant financial issue with coming up with the money to cover all the expenses on a monthly basis. Mm-hmm. And anytime we want to go get another helicopter, there's cost involved in getting that.
Yeah.
So sometimes we get sponsors that say, hey, I was in Vietnam and I'd love for you to get that Huey. I'll sponsor the trip for you to go get that. So we get the expenses paid because we go and get it. We use our own trucks, our own trailers to go pick that thing up and bring it here to the museum.
Right.
And then our own people do the restoration. And then there's cost of materials and stuff like that to get the proper parts. So if we can get a benefactor that will sponsor that's how we normally go about it. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we'll pick things up and then they just sit in one of our storage hangars waiting to find a benefactor or a sponsor to get that aircraft restored to flight again.
Right.
But then again, the daily, the monthly bills to pay for the facility.
Oh, yeah.
That's our biggest problem here.
I'm sure it is. I mean, because it started off as a how do you say, a passion project, right?
Or a hobby.
A hobby.
Yeah.
And now it's become this entity, but people will flock here for it. I bet you there's a lot of people that have no idea that you even exist.
Probably not. I mean, most of the people that know we're here, they're devout aviation enthusiasts.
Right.
They know we're here. They seek us out. They through their own grapevine of people talking. But I'd say the average public, like you can go down to Babel Park here in San Diego, and you'll walk by 8 or 9 museums.
Yeah.
There's a train museum down there. Hey, let's go see the train museum.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't happen up here.
No.
We would love to have a spot in Balboa Park, and maybe that'll happen one of these days. Because in Balboa Park, you have the Aerospace Museum, you have they have a car museum, and that would be a perfect spot for us to have the Rotorcraft Museum down there. And then you would have more traffic and more exposure to just the general public that doesn't even know we exist.
So let's just say that, let's just say Jeff Bezos from Amazon decided to be a benefactor and wrote you a blank check. What would be the next big thing you'd love to do with this project?
That'd be interesting. If we had that type of funding, I think I would make a play to figure out how we could get down to the Balboa Park area, because that's Museum Row here in San Diego. And if you had the money and you went to them and said, look, I'll build right here in this empty, because there's a lot of undeveloped areas out there. That's what I would do. That'd be the ideal thing. Short of that, I'd come here and build another hangar.
Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely what we need, because we're as stuffed as you can be right now.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, it's jam-packed.
Matter of fact, most of the aviation enthusiasts that come visit the museum, they're camera fanatics, too. They want to take a picture, and they're always on me. I can't get any perspective. I got rotor blades going every which direction, and I can't get a picture of just that aircraft without pieces of the other aircraft, fouling up the picture. So if we could do something like that, we need to spread out. Right. I could take exactly what I have right now, double the size of the building, probably make the photographers happy.
Right.
So that's the first thing I would love to do. And then, of course, a lot of what we maybe turn down or don't accept or don't try to get. It's because I have something very similar to it already in the museum, and I'm trying to represent all the different type of rotorcraft and what's unique about them rather than having duplication. But there's a need for duplication because there's something unique about that machine.
Oh, yeah.
Even though it looks exactly like this other machine, maybe it's history. You know, it's the first one to fly the president. You know, and so we would love to do that, but it's really about space and the facility and the cost of that space and facility.
Is there a certain bird you'd love to have that you don't have here?
Oh boy, there's tons.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't even name them. There's so many.
Yeah.
As I told you, right now I'm taking a lot of those treasures, which we could never own because there's only one built,
right?
And it's already in the Smithsonian, and they're never going to give it to me.
Yeah, right.
So, but there's at least 20 of them that I'd love to have.
But you have like 35 different aircraft here. I mean, it's a mind-blowing experience. We were even joking earlier. You have the videos in front of a lot of these aircraft.
Oh, yes.
And you could spend an hour and a half just consuming the videos.
Oh, yeah. There's over 30 videos in there in front of the aircraft that they're representing. And each video is about 3 minutes long. So if you just came by and walked through our museum and watched every video, you'd be here for an hour and a half.
And so you can see them in flight.
Yes, and a lot of times it's that very machine that you're looking at in that flight.
That's so awesome. Yeah. So how can people get a hold of you? What's the best way to connect with you?
Well, on our website, we're rotors.org. I say that with a little apprehension because none of us here are webmasters.
Right.
Our website, anyone to look at it would say, your website needs updating. But what we do tend to update is our, what we call hangar happenings. And that's updated on a monthly basis. We have a guy that writes very well, and he creates everything that we've done that month, and he publishes on our website every month.
Oh, nice.
So that's called hangar happenings. Some of our aircraft are on that website. Some aren't. They should be. But we just don't have that type of expertise to really dive in and make the website what we want. But through our website, you can contact us at comms, C-O-M-M-S, comms at rotors.org.
Right.
You can get a hold of me directly, Mark at rotors.org.
Okay.
And, or just come down and visit us.
Right on. Man, I just think this is a treasure. This is something in San Diego County I had no idea about. When Pete brought me here, it was a big surprise. You know, we had a fun time kind of building the anticipation here. But I loved it. You know, Mark, thanks for having us here at your amazing museum. It was a wonderful trip, and I wish you nothing but the success in the future.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And anybody that wants to come by is welcome here. We're open on Tuesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays.
Okay.
And from about 4 to 10 a.m. to 4 p.m.
10 a.m. to 4 p.m.
Yeah,
all right.
On those 3 days.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
You bet.
Hey, everybody. Let's go downstairs and let's check out the Classic Rotors Museum.
This aircraft right here, if it doesn't look familiar, it's just like all the other quad-rotor drones that you see the kids playing with. Difference here is this one's 50 feet by 50 feet. And it has a fire attack water tank on it. So this will be used to fight fires. The difference between this and the way they fight fires today with helicopters is you have a manned helicopter. You have a mandate that says you're only going to fight the fire during the day for obvious safety reasons, so the other pilots can see what's up there and they don't run into each other. But with a drone, an autonomous vehicle, this thing will fly around on its own. It will identify through infrared light sources to find out where the fire is. It will fly to those points. It will drop the amount of water that it feels it needs to drop for that size of infrared signature. Then it will fly to the next signature and drop water there. When it's exhausted its water, it will then fly to a predetermined fill point, and it will basically snorkel up another gallons of water, and it would continue the fight. Also, if you look at drones in the form of a swarm, where you have 10 of these drones following each other, fighting a fire line. And a fire line, if you ever see a fire on a ridge line, I mean, it's not straight at all. And the atmospheric conditions at different points along that fire line is all different. So knowing when to drop the water, knowing what the wind direction is and how strong the wind is very important. And that's what makes a firefighter and a fire attack fighter in an airplane, that's his expertise. He's dropping water at a spot that knows that then the wind will blow it where he wants it to be. So you have the same thing here, but we can simulate that digitally. In order for this drone to fly through the air and stay on a course, it knows what the wind direction is and it knows what the power of that wind is. So as these things are all flying along, following a fire front, each one of them will offset appropriately at the time that it drops the water. So its drop will then go into the fire front. So all that type of technology is already out there today. All we're doing is just combining it in a larger vehicle. This particular one was built with just 380-gallon tank on it. The so-called bigger drone, which really isn't physically larger, but it will be more powerful, it'll be able to lift a 1,000-gallon tank, which is about 8,000 pounds. And that's kind of the sweet spot that we're trying to go for in fighting fires, is you got 10 drones out there, each with 1,000 gallons on board, and they can drop 10,000 gallons on a fire front. And we feel that this would fight the fire more effectively. And of course, it's 24/7. It's not going to take a break because the sun goes down. It's going to keep on going throughout the night. So right off the bat, it would be an augment to the existing firefighting strategy. Maybe you have the human pilots up there fighting the fire. Then they deploy these at night and let them fly all around. They all know where they are at. They're not going to run into each other, and they'll continue the fight. Because right now, they'll take 2 or 3 steps forward during the day, and then at night, lose those 2 or 3 steps while the fire continues to fester at night. So that's what we're doing here. We're just bringing the expertise of rotorcraft, because we're rotorcraft people here at the museum. And but that's our contribution to this project, is to get the rotor system running smooth and capable of lifting that load of water in this particular machine. So now this aircraft here is referred to as the Heli Pod. And this particular aircraft has 2 chainsaw motors. These are chainsaw engines up here. And it had a big ducted fan that would amount to here, and that would articulate all around in order to put the direction of flight that you want to be in. This was back in 1962. And it hit a bunch of people in the Hollywood area. In this picture down here, Doris Day, she was one of the big contributors or investors in this project. And then there was about 20 or 30 others that invested in this. Now the whole idea, this was going to revolutionize transportation, especially say in the LA area. You wouldn't have traffic jams anymore because you're just going to wheel this out of your garage and hop in it and fly to work. Or you're going to go to the beach with it or what have you. Now it was a single-seater aircraft, but they show it rescuing people with a ladder trailing below it, and you're pulling somebody out of the water. The problem with this thing back in the day, the investors thought, well, we have to get a bunch of patents. So they ran around, they got 40 patents from 40 different countries. And they would, in their meetings with their investors, they would tell them, well, we got the patent in China, we got the patent in Japan, and as if that was going to create success. Well, as they're spending all this money getting patents, they spend more money on lawyers and getting this type of work done than they did on actually building the machine, so they never really quite finished it. They got it to this stage and then ran out of money, and then the project ended. My thoughts are, if they would have put the money into the project, that probably they would have got this thing to fly. Now, how practical would it have been that you're going to fly all around LA and I have pictures where it looks like a woman went out shopping and she's got her hands full of bags of shopping. And first of all, she couldn't even fit them in here. And then to think that you're just going to get in and fly home, it just doesn't work out that way. Like I said, my early beginnings that I'm going to build my helicopter in my backyard, teach myself how to fly it, and then fly to and from work, yeah, that didn't quite work out. It's just not that simple. So right now I'm sitting on what most people refer to as a Huey. These were very popular during the Vietnam War. They built more of these helicopters than any other helicopter built today. They built some 12,000 of them during the time of Vietnam. So either you were going into battle, or they're pulling you out of the battle, this is the machine that you were in. This particular one was one of the later models. It's a twin engine. They called it a UH-1N. And primarily the Navy took delivery of these things, and they were used by the Navy. But during the Vietnam War, they were flying all kinds of piston-powered helicopters during that time. And this was the first time that they really started utilizing turbine-powered helicopters. And this thing just revolutionized. As a matter of fact, they called the Vietnam War the helicopter war, because everything was all about how do we get into this dense jungle and mountain ranges, and it was just a very different type of war. You just didn't have a front line and you're marching through. So in Vietnam, they came up with the Huey helicopter, and they said, this is what we're going to use to fight this war. And they would take troops in, and they would fight a particular area, and then they would take them out at the end of the day. So the Huey was very instrumental in doing that. Now, this particular helicopter has what we call, it's a two-bladed rotor system. So this would be some of the first development of this type of helicopter. Then they came out with this helicopter over here. So if people aren't aware of this one, this is called a Robinson R-22. Again, it goes back to this two-bladed system, and this would be one of a version of a Huey in modern day form. It was kind of built that the average person could buy one of these, own them, learn to fly it, take lessons in it, and then park it in their backyard if they wanted to. That was always my story in the beginning. I wanted to build a helicopter and fly to and from my home for work. But this right here takes care of that. You don't have to build it, you can just buy it. So, two different versions. This was the first type of this two-bladed system, and then this is the modern day version of a two-bladed system. We're one of the few museums, well, matter of fact, we're the only museum that has 4 different versions out of the 5 generations of tandem rotor helicopters. This particular one right here was the first. This was built in 1948. And it was the first time that they built a helicopter with dual rotors, one in the front, one in the back. Hence we refer to it as a tandem rotor helicopter. As you can see, this open framework, and it's built with tubes. And originally they would cover this with fabric. But a lot of the early development of this machine was flown just as you see it here. I have several videos of this flying just as you see it. But with it like this, I call it our invisible helicopter. You can look at all the control systems. As you come down here, you can see that the engine is just sitting out there in the open. And all the cables and everything. Now you see a lot of this covering on it. That's because we're doing some painting on it, finishing up the restoration of this aircraft. When we're done, this will be a flyable helicopter. Let's go up to the front here real quick. By the way, I don't know if you can see this, but this is how we first retrieved it out of the scrapyard that it was sitting in. So that's what we started with. And this is what we have now. Even in the cockpit, they had tandem seating where you had the pilot in the front and a co-pilot in the back. But this aircraft, we've spent now over 8 years on it to get it to the condition you see it in now. And it will be the only one in the world flying. Now, we look at the second generation. This right here is the second generation of the tandem rotors. This particular one was used by the Navy, and it was primarily used when they would launch aircraft off of an aircraft carrier. This would literally launch first. They called it a sea guard. It would just sit out there and hover and wait to see if an aircraft had a problem on takeoff to where it ended up in the water, or if an aircraft had a problem on landing and it ended up in the water. This aircraft would then rescue you. So they referred to this as a HUP, H-U-P, which stood for Helicopter Utility Piasecki. This one over here, that first generation, that was the HRP, which was Helicopter Rescue Piasecki. Piasecki was the second pioneer of helicopters, and he built tandems. Now, the third generation is this one right here. This is called an H-21. And the H-21 was also, by the way, all these helicopters, especially the first one we talked about, they referred to it as the flying banana because it's shaped like a banana. This one also had the phrase flying banana. This one, though, right here was a real workhorse. I mean, it was in Vietnam in 1963, and it was primarily used to transport troops to and out of some battle, some area that they were trying to take over. And this helicopter is primarily used for that. They built about 600 of them, and its heyday was definitely Vietnam. Shortly after that, then they started flying the Hueys. This is a piston-powered aircraft, so it was pretty old school when it came to helicopters once they started flying the turbine Hueys. Now after this, we come over to this aircraft right here. This right here is a CH-46. This particular one was a rescue aircraft. It was used at Cherry Point in South Carolina. And when this was donated to us from the government, since we're a helicopter museum, the government will give us assets that they no longer use. In this case, they decommissioned this aircraft, and they said, "Hey, Classic Rotors, do you want this aircraft?" And we said, "Sure." So we went down there and got this aircraft and flew it from South Carolina back to San Diego. It was about a 2,500-mile flight. We had to take 10 fuel stops. And people asked me, "What type of problems did you have on this flight?" We had absolutely no mechanical problems whatsoever. Our biggest problem was the credit card. So when we first stopped at our first fuel station, we fueled up. It was about 1,500 gallons worth of fuel. Actually, $1,500 worth of fuel. The next day when we tried to use the card again, and this was a debit card, by the way, the card didn't work. We called, we said, "How come our card isn't working?" They said, "Oh, there's been fraud committed on your card." And I says, "What's that?" "Well, someone put $1,500 worth of gasoline in a vehicle." And I said, "Well, that's us." And they go, "Well, what are you driving?" I said, "We're driving a helicopter." So at that point, she goes, "Oh, well, we're going to have to correct this." So they fixed this. Now, this is all going down on a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday was when this was happening. We get to the next stop, and all of a sudden the card isn't working again. And what we found out was for daily gas purchases, we had $2,500 limit. So I said, "Let's increase that, make it $10,000. And I remember she said, "Well, I, Mary Lou, here on a Saturday in Broken Bow, Nebraska, I can only authorize $7,500. I said, "Great, give us $7,500. We got to get home." So after that, we had no other problems. When we came back, I talked to a friend of mine who also runs very large tandem rotor helicopters, and I explaining to him about our biggest problem was the credit card and fuel. And he goes, well, Mark, I don't have any sympathy for your fueling problems. And I said, why is that? And he says, well, our helicopter takes 2,000 gallons of fuel, and we're flying through the jungles of Papua New Guinea. And when I need fuel, I land out in the middle of nowhere, and a bunch of guys come running out with guns and a bunch of barrels worth of fuel, and they fuel me in the middle of the jungle. And guess what, Mark? They don't take credit cards. I have to carry suitcases of cash and denominations of only $20 bills. So literally, I have suitcases of cash to pay for my fuel needs when we're transiting our aircraft through some of the countries we fly in. So therefore, he had no sympathy for my fueling problems. So this particular helicopter right here, it's referred to as the Model 15 Trifibian. The pioneer of this helicopter was a man by the name of Monty, so this was referred to as the Monty Copter. What makes it uniquely different from all other rotorcraft that I've ever seen, I've never seen one that's referred to as a trifibian. So land, air, or sea. And you know it's a trifibian because, of course, it has an anchor. Anything that's going to land on the water here in the U.S., you better have an anchor on board. So this particular aircraft, it had a turbine engine, but the turbine engine was not used to turn something. What they did is they blew all the exhaust of that turbine engine out through the rotor blades, and you can see one of the rotor blades are up there. And at the tip of that blade is a nozzle. And so the air would come out of that nozzle and make the rotor blade turn. The reason why they did that, that was the easiest way for them to accomplish the trifibian aspects. Because what they would do is that would handle the flight, but then they would, with a big diverter valve, rather than blowing that air out through the tip, they would blow it out right through the tail. That gave them the propulsion when they were on the water. So it kind of created a little rooster tail. Looked like those hydrofoil boats blowing air out. And then, of course, the body is built in such a way that it floats. So in one of their promotional videos, they show this thing going down a boat ramp, a boat launching ramp, goes right into the water. You see the motor out into the middle of the lake, and then they slide this cabin back, and they come out and they sit right on this stub wing here with their fishing poles, and they start fishing. Then it shows, like later on in the day, they put their camping gear in back, and they have a sleeping bag, and I guess they're gonna go to sleep for the evening. Next day they show it lifting off of the water, taking off and flying off somewhere. So it's just like the Jetsons, you know, that you can do all those items with just this one aircraft. This aircraft right here was called the QH-50. And that stands for, normally the Q means it's some type of submarine hunting type of machine. And that's what this thing was. It's an actual drone. There's no pilot on it. What you see was the entire aircraft. And also it's coaxial rotor. So you have one rotor turning clockwise and the other one turning counterclockwise. Therefore, there's no tail rotor because there's no torque on this aircraft. But what's interesting about this aircraft is we're talking back in the 1960s that this aircraft was produced. So nowadays you hear the military always talking about drones. Drones this, drones that. Yet here we are in the 60s. Not only was this a drone, it's a drone helicopter, not like the fixed wing machines that they're pretty much running a lot of today. But here was a helicopter drone, and slung underneath was 2 Mark 44 torpedoes. So this is an armed torpedo-carrying drone hunting a submarine. It had its own sonar detection device here that would drop down into the water, and it would listen for a submarine. Now, The thing about this is it could be right on top of the submarine. The submarine doesn't know it's there because it's really not making any contact with the water. So all the submarine knows is everything's fine. And then before you know it, there's a torpedo in the water coming from this. Now, they wouldn't let this thing just launch its own torpedo. All this information and data was being sent back to a ship that's probably over the horizon. So even if the submarine was looking, they didn't see any ships anywhere. And this thing's just up there hovering above them, and it's hunting them. So that's back in the 1960s. So when people get all excited about drones, I says, well, they've been around for a long time. And they've been carrying torpedoes on top of that in a coaxial rotor head type configuration. So in the early days, this right here is not a part of this machine. This would have sat on the deck several feet away from this aircraft. And because, again, we're talking the early days of drones, everybody was afraid to just let this thing lift off the deck on its own and go fly and find a submarine. So they wanted a human to take these controls here and fly this aircraft off the deck. And then once they got it about 100 yards away, then they'd push the button and let it go off on its own. Same thing, when this aircraft was through with its mission, it would come back, it would park itself in a hover about 100 yards off the deck. The human then would take over, bring it in, and land it on the deck. Even though it was perfectly capable of doing it itself, everybody felt good that there was human intervention there.